Using a 10mm socket, remove the negative side of the battery terminal. Remove the following panels that lead to the rear of the vehicle: driver and passenger side kick panels, floor panels, and B-pillar panel. This rear small panel has a Phillips screw that will need to be unscrewed first. We will need to feed the power wire through the factory rubber grommet. This is the hardest part of the installation. Cut a hole in the rubber using a razor or similarly sharp object. Pull the power wire through and run the power wire to the amp's location. You will need to drop this panel in order to get the power wire through. For now, zip tie the power wire near the battery area. This will prevent the power wire from pulling out of the rubber grommet when pulling it back to the amp's location. You can leave the power wire at the floorboard for now. Factory stereos do not have a remote turn-on wire like an aftermarket unit does, so we will need to tap into the stereo's turn-on ignition wire from the fuse panel. Grab your fuse puller and pull this fuse out. It is a fourth from the top to the very right. You're going to need a fuse tap wire. They are called Addi-Circuit by Bussmann fuses. You will need the ATR version. Make sure to add the secondary fuse of 10 amps to it. Insert the fuse tap back into the original area. Next, we will strip back the remote wire, twist the wire, insert it into the connector, and crimp it on. Run this wire neatly down the dash and use zip ties to keep it away from any moving parts. Run this wire down to the B pillar where the LOC will be. Your aftermarket stereo has pre-outs for amplifiers to accept. Your factory stereo does not. We will tap into the factory speaker's outputs with this line-out converter. These wires that I'm untying tap into the outputs of your speaker wire, and then it converts it to low-level preamp RCAs that your amplifier usually accepts. So here we have a white with a black stripe. That is the left side negative speaker wire. Then we have the white solid. That is the left positive speaker wire. Then we have gray with a black stripe. That is the right side negative wire. And the gray solid, that's the right positive side speaker wire. These are all inputs. This brown wire we will cap off. If noise is present, you may need to use this wire. So this is a posi tap. I like to use these to tap into the outputs of the speaker wire in the vehicle. They are pretty reliable, that's why I like to use them. You can also use T-taps and male spades, but I prefer these. This gray side taps into the outputs of the speaker wire in the car. The red side is what taps onto your LOC wires. Since we are using the line-out converter for a mono signal, we can tie the two solid positive wires together, which are gray and white. Use this red cap and push down on the two wires and tighten it. Some of the wires should poke out on the top. Then take the other side of the posi tap and twist it on the cap. Make sure the wires do not pull out and are tight. Next, take the gray and the white with the stripe, which are the right and left negatives, and tie them together. Using the same method before, put on the red cap and twist it down. There should be some wire poking out the top. Twist on the other side of the posi tap. You can also use the LOC for a stereo signal, but since it's a sub, we do not really need it since subs are mono anyways. If you want to, you can though. I will have a link in the description area of the other two wire outputs on the other side of the B pillar if you want to tap into those. Also, make sure to cap off the brown wire. It's only used if noise is present, and we should not have any if done correctly. So now we're going to tap into the speaker output wires. The positive wire is white. Use the gray side of the posi tap and put the tap around the wire. Next, twist on the posi tap. You now have your positive signal input. Do the same for the negative. It is black. You will notice that these wires are actually twisted together. These are the speaker wires for the vehicle. Then plug in your RCAs into the line-out converter. If you're installing an amplifier in an aftermarket stereo, it's even easier. The remote wire that comes out is a blue with a white stripe. Connect your remote turn-on wire to this wire of the stereo. This is the same thing we did as tapping into the fuse block. Twist the wires together and crimp them using a crimper. I like to use these snail caps. They're very reliable for crimp connections. And also, your stereo will have RCA pre-outs already in the back of them. Just plug them into the back, in the rear, or the subwoofer outputs of your aftermarket stereo. These will also run back to the amp. Make sure to tuck the LOC where it will not interfere with moving parts. Let's now run the remote wire in the RCAs under the seat and to the back of the vehicle. Make sure to zip tie the wires for a nice and neat appearance. Let's go back to the passenger side where your power wire is at and tuck it into the carpet. Pull the carpet back and run the power wire to the floor. Run it down the side of the vehicle and back to the amp's location. I found it easier once I removed the rear seat to get this power wire through. The rear seat comes out by just pulling up and out on it. Run your power wire back to the amp location also. Use zip ties along the way to make it look nice. I decided to mount the amp to the back of the seat. Make sure you use screws that are not too long. You don't want the screws coming out the back of the seat. Now I'm going to strip back the power wire, the ground wire, and the remote wire and insert it into the amp. Put a cloth over the amp cables. That way, when you strip the wire back, the strands don't get caught in the carpet. Insert your power wire into the area where it says 12-volt constant or B+. Tighten down the power wire using your hex key or Phillips screwdriver. Next, insert the remote wire. The blue wire remote will go into the REM input on the amplifier. Now I'm going to strip back the ground wire. Insert the ground wire into the ground input terminal on the amplifier and tighten down. Next, insert your RCAs into the input of the amplifier. The red into the red and the black into the white. To ground the amplifier, I'm going to use a seat bolt. First, remove the seat bolt from the area. Sand down the paint for a best ground connection. Install the ground ring, then the seat belt, then the bolt. Connect your speaker wire from your amplifier's outputs to your subwoofer box. Since there are so many wiring configurations for subwoofer outputs, I would check with your manufacturer to determine which is the best setup for you. It basically comes down to having the lowest impedance that your amplifier can handle without causing it any harm. Twist your wires and insert them into the subwoofer input. Make sure to keep the same positive on the amp as you did on the speaker, and the same negative the same way. I put some tubing on the power wire to make it look more factory. If you're using a 4-gauge cable, remove this inner ring. That is for 8-gauge cable only. Make sure to put the barrel on the power wire first, then strip the power wire back a half an inch and push it into the fuse holder. Tighten down the wire with the hex tool. You can also add heat shrink for more secure connection. Do the same thing for the other side. Using a 10mm socket, remove the positive terminal from the battery. Be careful not to drop this bolt into the engine bay. Insert the positive ring on the battery terminal, then put the bolt back on and tighten down. Next, reattach the ground and tighten it down. Afterwards, test the system to make sure it works fine.